So the base application that I'm using is this board game app that I built earlier on in the term because it had some has-many-through relationships built into it. And so if we went to a board game has many mechanics, designers, and categories. I'm going to work with categories. And so there is a board games table, there is a categories table, but there is also a join table, which is a board games categories table. And so we can see that in the schema. There is the board game categories table, and it has the two foreign keys in it. So there's a foreign key for the board game and a foreign key for the category. If we were to look at the board game itself, you can see at least one side of that relationship. A board game has many board game categories, so that's the relationship to the join table. And then a board game has many categories through board games categories. So that's how it gets its relationship to the other side of that join table, which is straight up the categories. So what we want to be able to do is from this back end. So I previously didn't have this application using ActiveAdmin, but for this demo, I sort of before class added ActiveAdmin to it. So I've already installed ActiveAdmin. I've already registered the two resources, the board games and the categories, as resources within ActiveAdmin. So if I go to categories, we can see all of the categories that are in the system, and they were brought in by way of a seed script. If we go to board games, we can see that as well. There's all the properties. There's quite a few different properties of a board game. And if we edited a board game or we went to click new, we would see a very big form with all of the properties of the board game in it. What I would like is I'd like added to this form a way of seeing all the existing related categories, being able to remove existing categories, and being able to add new categories. And all of that can be done with a few tweaks to the board game model, and then in the AppAdmin folder, some tweaks to the board game file that's found in there, which allows us to tweak this form. So what we'll start with is we'll start in the model here. This is something that's part of Active Record, so this isn't directly related to ActiveAdmin. All Active Record models have the ability to accept parameters for things that they are related to. So in this case, a board game has many or is related in some way. There's an association to board game categories. So I can actually submit a form or submit data to a board game model that includes board game categories as well. And so to enable that in my model, what I do is I add the accepts nested attributes for. And what does it accept nested attributes for? Well, board game categories. And I want to not only be able to set those board game categories, but also to remove them. And so I have to add an extra flag that says allow destroy true. So that's the only addition I need to make in the model. This model now accepts nested attributes for this relationship. It only works because that relationship is defined there. So if this has many wasn't defined there, I couldn't accept those nested attributes for it. And then because I want to be able to also remove board game categories, I have this allow destroy in there. And then on the ActiveAdmin side of things, we have this file where we sort of whitelist the parameters that we want to allow our admin users to be able to modify. Now a board game has a whole bunch of parameters, and I didn't want to bother typing them all out here, so I've only whitelisted the name. But you can imagine I would go in and I could also whitelist the ratings and the number of players and all the other things that a board game has as properties. But we'll keep things simple, and I'll only mess with the name. But here's what I'm also going to do is now that I want to be able to accept nested attributes for the board game categories, I have to whitelist those here as well. So I have to say board game categories. And which board game categories do I wish to accept nested attributes for? This one I'm not sure about. I'll go through the process and then I'll remove it and see if it still works. This is me accepting nested attributes for the ID of the board game category table. Yeah, we'll see if that's really necessary. But the board game ID and the category ID, I know those are required. And then there's a special flag that I have to add here, which is _destroy, which isn't itself a property of board game category, but when we submit the form from ActiveAdmin, it's going to be like a virtual property that form is going to submit, and so it still needs to be whitelisted so it can make its way through, and that'll allow us to do the deletion of board game categories. So let me make sure I have no typos here. Board game categories, ID, board game ID, category ID, destroy. When I was doing this earlier with the other section, I had by accident put an S here. And everything looked like it was working, except the categories I couldn't like actually add new ones or delete them, but I could see them. And this is one of the downsides to having a really flexible programming language like Ruby that's interpreted, because if this was a compiled language, the compiler would catch that, right? But because it's an interpreted language, it didn't even error, right? It just silently didn't do the thing that I wanted. And I had to go through and stare at it for a while and notice that I had an S where I shouldn't have. Okay, so I think that's all good. Now that alone doesn't solve the problem. So if I went to reload this page, we'd still see this whole form. This whole form is dynamically generated for us. There is no view within my Rails project where this form is available for editing. And so it's automatically created for us by ActiveAdmin, which is lovely. But now we want to mess with it. And when we want to mess with it, what that means is ActiveAdmin is going to be like, okay, you want to mess with it? Well, now you have to rebuild that entire form yourself. And again, because there's a lot of properties here, I won't rebuild the whole form myself. I'll put the rank and the name in and the categories, and you can just imagine the process of adding all the other things. So within this file, ActiveAdmin gives us access to a few different DSLs. And I may have mentioned this acronym before in the past, but a DSL is a domain-specific language. It's very common to do this kind of thing in the Ruby community, where if you're going to try to solve a problem, you first create like a miniature language in which you can then solve the problem. So there's a domain-specific language for working with forms that I'm going to use within this tool here. And Rails itself, in many ways, is a domain-specific language for creating web applications. Okay, so form do, and I get a form builder f end, and what ActiveAdmin uses to build its forms is this thing called Formtastic. It's another gem, and so some of these properties of this f are just things that Formtastic offers, like semantic errors and f dot object dot errors dot keys. So that just came directly from the Formtastic docs, and so that's going to make it so that like if I have a validation error, those validation errors are still going to be displayed with this form. And then I'm going to say f dot inputs, and then the heading for that is going to be board game do, and then inside of there I'm going to say I want to be able to edit the name, and at least initially the ranking. The name I will be able to change, the ranking I won't unless I add that to my permit params up here. And last but not least, I also want to be able to save or cancel, and so f.actions does that. So f is this form builder that builds the individual pieces of our form, display errors if there are any, make a subsection of the form where the name and the ranking have inputs, and then display either the save and cancel buttons or the update and cancel buttons there. So let's head back over here and reload this form. Undefined method ranking, is that because I didn't permit it as params? Probably. Okay, well let's just take that out temporarily. It might just actually be called something different in the schema. So there's the name. Haven't yet built out the category stuff yet, but we can test to see if this actually works. Meanwhile, over at the front end of the page, I will load up this particular game so that we can, once we start messing with the categories, we can sort of see them change. And just to test to see if this form, now that I've started to recreate it, works, I can add an exclamation mark at the end of the game name, and I can update it. And we can see that that worked. It persisted that exclamation mark. Oh, it was rank. So if I wanted to add that in here, f.input for the rank. There it is. And if I added that to my permit params, then I could actually modify that rank. And then you could imagine me doing this for all the different properties, bringing them back into play. I won't do that. What I will do, though, is bring in the categories. And so for this, we have an f.hasmany, and it has many board game categories. And again, I want to flag that I want to be able to destroy categories. So that'll give me, the has many gives me a drop-down. So for every category, I'll get this little drop-down box that'll show which category, and if there's many of them, I'll get multiple drop-downs. And the allow destroy will add a little check mark that says delete. So if I want to delete this category, an existing category, I can do that by way of the check mark. And then for this, I get a nested form, so I'll give myself a nested form builder, and I'll just ask for an input for a category on that. Everything else remains the same. I still have my actions, and this is nested within the inputs. So again, just checking for typos here. F has many board game categories. Allow destroy is true. And then we're asking for an input for a category. So this game has science fiction, ancient, and horror. Different order, but there you go. Ancient, science fiction, horror. And there's my little deletes. And so I could go and be like, okay, this game is no longer ancient. So I take a check mark there and I update it. And I can reload that here. And it didn't work. Close, but no cigar, Kyle. So what have I done wrong? There will be a typo somewhere in what I've done here. So I've got permit params, and that's board game categories. And that is what I missed. Attributes. So over here, it's accept nested attributes for, and here it's board game categories attributes. And again, notice dynamic language, it just silently fails. It looks like everything's working, but there's no compiler to tell me like that thing that you asked for doesn't actually exist. So let's try that again. So delete that, update it. now we just have 2 categories. If I was to edit this game again, this is pretty slick. I click this Add New Board Game Category button, and just using a little bit of JavaScript, it pops up a new drop-down for me. I can put like Ancient back in there, but I can also say, well, this game is also fantasy, and it's also involves miniatures. And then I can update the board game, come back over here, and we can see all of those things have happened. So that's really all that's involved with has many throughs, but there's a few other things I can show you how to tweak in ActiveAdmin to make this a little bit more complete. So we used the form DSL here to modify the form. A few of the things that would be nice is on this show page within ActiveAdmin, it would be nice to have a row present here that showed the categories. And it might also be nice on this table view listing of all of my board games to show maybe a list of the categories there as well. The same thing that happened with our form though is going to happen in both of these things, because all of this, like this table and that individual page view, because they were auto-generated, there's no view that I can just go and edit. So I'm going to have to rebuild these pages, each with a separate DSL. This is where ActiveAdmin steps a little bit outside of like the Rails way of doing things. In a lot of other gems, what you would have happen, and Devise does this. Devise has a bunch of built-in views for you for things like login forms. But if you want to then do some editing, you can run a generator, and Devise will take that sort of stuff that doesn't exist within your project and generate it into views in your view folder and allow you to edit those. ActiveAdmin doesn't have view generators for us. It gives us these DSLs. So I'll do the show page first. Again, I won't rebuild the whole thing. I'll just display the name and the rank, and you can imagine me doing the rest, but then I will do the categories. So for the show, it is do board game, and then within there, I want an attributes table, and within there, I want a row for the name and a row for the rank, and let's just see if that's working. So there's the name and the rank, and I could build out all the pieces piecewise if I wanted to. And I also want a row for the categories, but here I have to take the board game, and then I go to that board game, and I go to its collection of categories, and then I map those, because I don't want just the board games. Board game. I just want the board game names. So remember, the map command visits every element in a collection and applies some kind of transformation to it. So this will take the collection of category objects and just map them to just the name strings. And then I can take that collection and join each one of the names together as a comma delimited list. And then I want that injected back into my view, but Rails is really paranoid about injecting strings into views, because that's always a potential for you know, a lot of attack vectors. And so I have to flag this as HTML safe. And then Rails will be like, okay, you can inject it, that's fine. And so there we are. There's my list of categories. If I edited the board game and I removed fantasy from the list and I updated it, you can see it's now missing from there. And the last thing is, you know, how would we update this index table over here? And we have a DSL for that. And so the DSL for that is similar to the show. I say index do, and then within this index, I want this first column so that I can select different board games and apply batch actions to them if I wanted to. So I say selectable column there, and then for each column, like I want to see maybe the primary key and the name and the rank, and then I also want to be able to have this view, edit, and delete these actions here, and so that I have to say actions. And so if I reload this page, see, there's my selectable, my ID, my name, my rank, and my actions. Now it's just a matter of taking what I had in the show page, pasting that up here and changing row to column. And there we are. There is a bit of an n+1 issue here. So if we were worried about the speed at which this page was loaded, if we look at the development console, what I mean by n+1 is that n being the number of games present on this page, for every one of those, we now have had to gather up its categories. So when viewing this page, we gathered all of those products, but then notice a whole bunch of different selects from categories happened. This is a problem that happens a lot in Rails. You can sort of accidentally infuse these kind of n+1s into your application. I mean, it's a problem in all database-based applications that you can accidentally inject these, but because Rails does a lot of things automatically for us, we often sort of don't realize that we've suddenly degraded the performance of our app by adding this in. How you would fix this, I can't remember exactly. It's probably overloading the constructed controller that ActiveAdmin is using and have it sort of fetch those nested categories all at once when it fetches the collection of games. I won't go there, but I thought it was worth mentioning that there is a performance issue here that is unaddressed. So I will, I'll post all of this code up after class as a gist on GitHub, and I'll post this video as well. But were there any questions or comments about what I did today? Yeah.
So for the category drop-downs, what if you put duplicate categories?
What if you put duplicate categories? That's a good question. So I already have horror and then I add it again. Okay, so let's see. I update it. I have a feeling we're going to see 2 horrors, and we are. And so that might be a matter of putting certain uniqueness constraints on the join table now. So it can be addressed, but right now it's unaddressed. And so yeah, very good point. Right now we have the possibility of having dupes in our categories. So I'll delete that one. Any other questions or comments? And so yeah, even if like the built-in uniqueness constraint on Rails wasn't a solution, you can, for any active record model, write custom validators. And so this might be a matter of like writing a custom, because it's a pair of things that you want to be unique. And so you might have to do a custom sort of foreign key pair check on save in that category, board game categories join table. All right, so I will stop recording.